Every crime is a wound on the world. We're here to dissect it, layer by layer, to find the truth buried within. This is Anatomy of Crime. There is a specific kind of horror found in the perversion of safety. We are conditioned to believe that certain places are inviolable. A hospital is for healing, a church is for sanctuary, and a consulate, by international law and centuries of diplomatic tradition, is a protected space, an island of sovereign soil where bureaucracy, not violence, is the order of the day. When you walk through the doors of a consulate, you expect the quiet rustle of paper, the stamping of passports, and the tedious waiting of administrative procedure. You do not expect a kill team. You do not expect a bone saw. On a crisp October afternoon in 2018, a man named Jamal Khashoggi walked into the Saudi consulate in Istanbul, Turkey. He was there for the most mundane and hopeful of reasons: to pick up a document certifying he was divorced, so that he could marry the woman waiting for him just outside the gates. He handed over his phones, straightened his jacket, and stepped across the threshold. He never walked out. What happened inside those walls was not a sudden crime of passion. It was not a robbery gone wrong. It was something far colder and far more terrifying. It was the mobilization of the resources of a wealthy nation-state to extinguish a single human life. It was a murder planned with the logistical precision of a military operation, involving private jets, diplomatic cover, forensic experts, and a body double. Welcome to Anatomy of Crime. Today, we dissect the anatomy of a state-sponsored assassination. This case requires us to look beyond the gruesome headlines and peer into the dark machinery of authoritarian power. We will examine how a government identifies a threat, how it assembles a team to neutralize that threat, and how it attempts, and often fails, to scrub the blood from its hands in the digital age. We are analyzing the murder of Jamal Khashoggi. To understand the anatomy of this assassination, we must first understand the target. Jamal Khashoggi was not an outsider screaming at the gates. He was, for most of his life, the ultimate insider. Born in Medina in 1958 into a prominent family, his grandfather was the personal physician to the founding king of Saudi Arabia. Jamal grew up in the orbit of power. He was educated in the United States, obtaining a degree from Indiana State University, before returning to the kingdom to begin a career in journalism. For decades, Khashoggi navigated the complex red lines of Saudi media. He covered the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, interviewing a young Osama bin Laden before bin Laden turned his sights on the West. He rose to become the editor-in-chief of Al Watan, a progressive newspaper. He served as a media advisor to Prince Turki Al Faisal, the former head of Saudi intelligence and ambassador to the UK and the US. Jamal Khashoggi was a man who knew how the palace worked. He believed in the monarchy. He believed in the system. He just wanted it to be better. But the ground beneath him began to shift in 2015 with the ascension of King Salman and the rapid rise of his son, Mohammed bin Salman, often referred to by his initials MBS. MBS presented himself to the West as a reformer. He promised to diversify the economy. He curtailed the powers of the religious police, and he famously allowed women to drive. But this modernization came with a steep price, a demand for absolute, unquestioning loyalty. The traditional Saudi consensus building among royal factions was replaced by a vertical consolidation of power. In 2017, MBS detained hundreds of princes, businessmen, and officials in the Ritz-Carlton Hotel in Riyadh on allegations of corruption. It was a power move that signaled a new era. Silence was no longer enough. Enthusiastic endorsement was required. Khashoggi saw this shift. He saw the arrest of intellectuals and clerics. He saw the war in Yemen spiraling into a humanitarian catastrophe, and unlike many of his peers who stayed silent, Khashoggi began to speak. He didn't call for the overthrow of the monarchy. He simply asked for accountability. He asked for free expression. In the eyes of the new regime, this nuance made him far more dangerous than a radical. A radical can be dismissed as a terrorist. A moderate, credible insider who writes for the Washington Post and speaks to Western policymakers is an existential threat to the narrative of a benevolent reformer. Feeling the walls closing in, Khashoggi went into self-imposed exile in the United States in 2017. He began writing columns for the Washington Post that were critical of MBS. He was building a platform, and he was planning to launch an organization to counter Saudi state propaganda. He had become the one thing the new power structure could not tolerate, a voice they could not control. This brings us to the anatomy of the trap. Assassinations of this nature rarely happen by chance. They are engineered. In late September 2018, Khashoggi visited the Saudi consulate in Istanbul to obtain a document proving his divorce from a previous wife in Saudi Arabia. He needed this paper to marry Hatice Cengiz, a Turkish academic he had fallen in love with. When he visited on September 28, the consular staff were polite. They welcomed him. They told him the document wasn't ready and that he would need to return. This was the pivot point. The moment he walked out of the consulate that day, the clock started ticking. The system had acquired its target. Khashoggi was told to return on October 2nd. This gave the plotters 4 days to prepare. Intelligence gathered later suggests that the plan was activated almost immediately. The operation was not entrusted to local embassy security or low-level operatives. It was assigned to the Tiger Squad. The Tiger Squad is a name that has surfaced in intelligence reports, describing a unit of elite operatives within the Saudi military and intelligence services, answering directly to the highest levels of the royal court. Their mandate is covert operations, and allegations suggest the silencing of dissidents. The anatomy of the kill team provides the clearest evidence of intent. On the morning of October 2nd, 2 private Gulfstream jets arrived at Ataturk Airport in Istanbul from Riyadh. They carried 15 men. This was not a diplomatic delegation. Let us look at the roster. It included Mar Mutreb, a diplomat and intelligence officer who had been photographed traveling in MBS's personal entourage during visits to the United States and Europe. It included members of the Royal Guard. But the most chilling addition to the passenger manifest was Dr. Salah al-Tubaigi. Tubaigi was not a soldier. He was not a spy. He was the head of forensic evidence at the Saudi General Security Department. He was the president of the Saudi Fellowship of Forensic Pathology. He was a man who taught courses on crime scene investigation. Why would a diplomatic mission to discuss paperwork require the presence of a top-tier forensic pathologist? And why, as Turkish intelligence would later reveal, did he bring a bone saw? The inclusion of Tubaigi is the forensic equivalent of a smoking gun. You bring a negotiator if you want to talk. You bring a kidnapper if you want to extract. You bring a man who knows how to dismember a human body only if you intend to make that body disappear. The stage was set. It is October 2nd, 2018. It is 1:14 p.m. CCTV footage captures Jamal Khashoggi approaching the consulate entrance. He is wearing a dark jacket and a gray shirt. He hands his 2 mobile phones to Hatice Cengiz, who is waiting by the barriers. He tells her that if he does not come out, she should call an advisor to the Turkish president. This indicates that despite his decision to enter, Khashoggi still harbored a seed of fear. He knew the nature of the regime he was criticizing, but he trusted the diplomatic immunity of the location enough to take the risk. He walked past the Turkish police guard, through the steel gates, and into the consulate. Hatice Cengiz paced outside. She waited for an hour, then two. The sun began to set. The consulate employees left for the day, but Jamal did not come out. Inside the building, the anatomy of the crime was unfolding with brutal speed. Thanks to the fact that the Turkish intelligence agency, the MIT, had bugged the consulate, we have a terrifyingly high-fidelity understanding of what happened. This audio evidence, shared later with the CIA and other Western intelligence services, transforms this case from a mystery into a horror story. According to transcripts and intelligence leaks, the team was waiting. Before Khashoggi even arrived, the audio captures a conversation between Mar Mutreb and Dr. Tubegi. They are discussing the logistics of body disposal. Tubegi is heard referencing his expertise, reportedly saying that he knows how to cut well, but he has never done it on a warm body before. He suggests that he puts on headphones and listens to music while he works, and advises the others to do the same. This conversation, taking place minutes before the victim walks in, strips away any defense that this was an interrogation gone wrong. This was a slaughter by appointment. When Khashoggi enters, he is taken to the office of the Consul General. He is told he is going back to Riyadh. He refuses. He realizes the trap. The conversation is short. There is no lengthy negotiation. The violence begins almost immediately. The audio captures the sounds of a struggle. Khashoggi is heard asking if they are going to drug him. The reply is affirmative. "We will anesthetize you." There are sounds of suffocation. The struggle is brief. The physical anatomy of the murder is quick. A bag is placed over his head. His last intelligible words are reported to be, "I can't breathe." Then the silence returns, but it is a busy silence. Dr. Tubegi takes charge. The autopsy saw is activated. The audio recording captures the high-pitched whine of the saw cutting through bone. The investigation suggests that the body was dismembered in the Consul General's office or a nearby study. The surfaces had likely been prepared with plastic sheeting. The precision of the act is what stands out. This was not a chaotic frenzy. It was work. It was a job being performed by professionals who had a schedule to keep. The next phase of the anatomy is the deception. Killing the target is only half the mission. The other half is the getaway. The plotters knew there were cameras outside. They knew Hatice was waiting. They couldn't just say he never arrived, because the CCTV showed him entering. They had to make it look like he left. This is where the body double, Mustafa al-Madani, enters the narrative. Madani was brought along specifically because he had a similar build, age, and height to Khashoggi. After the murder, Madani dressed in Khashoggi's clothes, his pants, his shirt, his jacket. He put on a fake beard and glasses. At 2:52 p.m., approximately 90 minutes after Khashoggi walked in, the body double walked out of the back exit of the consulate. He was captured on CCTV. The intent was to create a visual alibi. If the police asked, the Saudis could point to the footage and say, "Look, he left. He walked away." But there was a flaw in the anatomy of the deception. A small, overlooked detail that forensic investigators often catch. While Madani was wearing Khashoggi's clothes, he was wearing his own shoes. Khashoggi had entered wearing dress shoes. Madani left wearing sneakers. It is a testament to the fact that no matter how well planned a crime is, there is always a variable the perpetrators forget. The kill team departed Istanbul that evening. They took the private jets back to Riyadh, stopping in Cairo. They likely carried the dismembered remains of Jamal Khashoggi in luggage, or disposed of them in a location that has never been found. They left the consulate as they found it, clean, quiet, and smelling of fresh paint and chemicals used to scrub the forensic evidence. But they had underestimated two things. First, the persistence of Hatice Cengiz, and second, the surveillance capabilities of the Turkish state. When Hatice realized Jamal was not coming out, she didn't just go home. She raised the alarm. She called the advisor to President Erdogan. By the next morning, the news was breaking. A Washington Post columnist was missing inside a Saudi diplomatic mission. This triggered the investigation phase, which became a geopolitical chess match. The anatomy of this investigation is unique because it was fought not just with magnifying glasses and fingerprints, but with leaks, press conferences, and diplomatic pressure. In the initial days, the Saudi narrative was one of complete denial. Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman gave an interview to Bloomberg stating that Khashoggi had left the consulate shortly after arriving. "We have nothing to hide," he said. The consulate opened its doors to reporters, allowing them to open cupboards and check under desks, a theatrical display of innocence. But Turkish investigators were already piecing together the truth. They knew about the jets. They knew about the 15 men, and most importantly, they had the tapes. President Recep Tayyip Erdogan of Turkey saw an opportunity. Turkey and Saudi Arabia were regional rivals. By exposing the murder, Erdogan could weaken MBS's standing on the world stage and pressure the United States. But Erdogan played his hand slowly. He didn't release the audio immediately. He initiated a slow drip of information. First, the names of the 15 suspects were leaked to pro-government newspapers. Their photos, taken at passport control, were plastered on front pages. The world began to Google these names and found their connections to the royal guard and the prince. Then the details of the bone saw emerged. Then the existence of the audio recording. Each leak forced the Saudi narrative to shift. First, they said he left. Then, as the evidence mounted, they suggested perhaps he died in a fistfight. A fistfight with 15 men, a fistfight that involved a forensic pathologist. The explanation was absurd, and the world knew it. Finally, under immense international pressure, the Saudi public prosecutor admitted that the killing was premeditated. But the blame was shifted. The narrative became that this was a rogue operation. The claim was that the deputy head of intelligence, Ahmed al-Asiri, and the royal court advisor, Saud al-Qahtani, had ordered the team to bring Khashoggi back, but the team had exceeded their orders and killed him. This rogue theory is a classic element in the anatomy of state crimes. It is the firewall. The goal is to sacrifice the pawns to protect the king. The men on the planes were arrested. 5 were sentenced to death, though these sentences were later commuted. But the questions remained. Would a team of loyalists really murder a high-profile journalist, dismember him, and risk an international crisis without approval from the top? Would they fly on government jets without authorization? The Western intelligence assessment was blunt. The CIA concluded with medium to high confidence that Mohammed bin Salman personally ordered the killing. The assessment was based on the centralization of power in the kingdom. The agency noted that nothing of this magnitude happens without the crown prince's knowledge. Furthermore, intelligence intercepts showed communications between the hit team and Mutreb's superiors during the operation, with Mutreb reportedly saying, Tell your boss, presumed to be MBS, that the deed is done. The forensic investigation of the consulate itself was delayed for 2 weeks. By the time Turkish police were allowed to enter, the building had been deep cleaned. Walls had been repainted. But even then, the anatomy of the cleanup was imperfect. Forensic luminal tests revealed traces of blood in the consul general's office. They found evidence of extensive scrubbing. The frantic effort to clean was in itself evidence of the crime. We must also look at the digital anatomy of this case. Khashoggi was not just killed physically, he was targeted digitally. In the months before his death, his phone had been infected with Pegasus spyware. This military-grade surveillance tool allowed his adversaries to track his location, read his messages, and listen to his calls. It allowed them to know his state of mind, his plans, and his schedule. The assassination was the culmination of a long campaign of digital stalking. The legal aftermath of the case was a theater of the absurd. Saudi Arabia held a trial for the accused men behind closed doors. International observers were barred. The names of the defendants were not released until the verdict. It was a judicial performance designed to close the file, not to uncover the truth. The mastermind allegedly identified by the CIA, MBS, faced no consequences within the kingdom. In fact, his grip on power tightened. In the West, the reaction was a collision between moral outrage and realpolitik. The United States, under the Trump administration, condemned the killing but refused to sever ties or halt arms sales. The strategic alliance, the oil and the counter-terrorism cooperation were deemed too valuable. The phrase anatomy of a transaction becomes relevant here. The life of one journalist was weighed against billions of dollars in military contracts and regional influence, and the scale tipped in favor of the state. However, the case did leave a permanent stain. It shattered the image of the reformer prince. It galvanized the human rights community. It forced corporations and universities to rethink their partnerships with the kingdom. The Khashoggi ban was introduced by the subsequent U.S. administration, allowing for visa restrictions on individuals acting on behalf of a foreign government to harass dissidents. As we reach the conclusion of this dissection, we must address the most haunting aspect of this anatomy, the missing body. Despite the arrests, despite the leaks, despite the global outcry, the remains of Jamal Khashoggi have never been found. There is no grave, there is no marker. This is the final, cruelest cut of the state-sponsored assassination. To deny the family a body is to deny them the ritual of closure. It is an act of erasure. It is a statement that says, we did not just kill him, we unmade him. The anatomy of the murder of Jamal Khashoggi is a study in the terrifying reach of modern authoritarianism. It shows us that borders are no protection against a state that views dissent as treason. It shows us that diplomatic protocols rely on honor, and when honor is absent, they become traps. We have looked at the planning, the forensic pathology, the digital surveillance, and the geopolitical cover-up. We have seen how a system mobilized to crush one man. But in doing so, they ensured that his voice would be amplified louder than he ever could have achieved in life. They tried to dissolve him in acid and bury him in silence. But instead, they etched his name into the history of the 21st century. There is a final, chilling lesson here. The squad that killed Jamal Khashoggi flew home on private jets, passed through VIP customs, and for a long time believed they had gotten away with it. And in a geopolitical sense, perhaps the masterminds did. but the anatomy of the crime remains visible. It is recorded in the audio archives of a rival intelligence agency. It is written in the CIA reports, and it is remembered by the woman who waited outside the door. The consulate in Istanbul still stands. The flag still flies. Business is conducted. Passports are stamped. But for those who know the anatomy of what happened on October 2, 2018, the building is no longer a place of diplomacy. It is a monument to the day when the state took off its mask, picked up a bone saw, and showed the world exactly what it was capable of. The most dangerous place in the world is not a war zone. It is a room where you are alone with a power that answers to no one. This has been Anatomy of Crime, where the truth is never simple, but always worth seeking.